Hi, I'm Jill Wiseman. Welcome to the Ogalala Lace Bracelet class. This is a really versatile bracelet. You're going to be able to make everything from a really sleek, streamlined bracelet to something that's got a whole bunch of ruffle on it and make it very feminine looking. We can even work it into a necklace, pendant, and or earrings. So I think you're going to have a really good time with this. Let's get started. The tools that you'll need for this project are needles. I like to use a size 10 on this project because it has a nice big eye for me to use when I'm threading my needle. You'll need some kind of scissors. I use these little pearl shears, but you can use any scissors around that will cut your thread. And then you'll want a tape measure to help you measure your bracelet so that it fits correctly. The materials you'll need for this project are 6mm fire polish beads. 3mm fire polish beads are an optional accent for the outside ruffles, and size 11 seed beads. The longer you make this bracelet, the more materials you'll need. You can refer to the accompanying handout for specific quantities of these materials. I like to use Fireline for this particular project because Fireline has a lot of body to it, and that gives our ruffles extra oomph. There's no reason why you couldn't use other kinds of threads such as Nymo or Eslon, but for me Fireline is my preferred method, and I like to use the 6-pound Fireline. In today's class, I'm going to be working on a little small sample like this. We created this smaller sample just so that we could show you those steps quickly and easily. But this is actually the full bracelet. This bracelet has a lot of different variations that you can work on. This is what I call full-on fluffy. There's 2 rows of lots of embellishment, and we've added the 3mm fire polish beads on the outside of each of these ruffles. You can stop adding steps at any point during the bracelet and get a perfectly gorgeous bracelet. So right here is what you would end up with after the very first step of adding the little small picot on the edge here. It's a beautiful streamlined bracelet, something a little more sleek, and just for those people who don't want a lot of ruffles. On this variation, we added just a single row of all of the ruffles. Here we've got the double, here we've got the single. So you can see that you get a little more white space in between here. It's just not quite as full. You still have a little bit of an extra double. You can see the double row right here, but when you're wearing it, all you're seeing is the single row of ruffles. This variation is, I substituted the fire polish, and instead I used 3mm Swarovski crystals. So you can see that as this moves, you're going to get a lot of sparkle and shine. The other thing that's different here is that my ruffles are shorter. You're going to be adding 3 layers of ruffles, or actually of embellishment, and this particular bracelet I ended after the 2nd row of embellishment. Normally I would put the Swarovski crystal or the 3mm fire polish on the outside, the last row of embellishment, but there's no reason why you can't do that on the 2nd row of embellishment also and just have a slightly shorter ruffle. Something else that you can do is use this, do a short piece of your bracelet and create a really pretty pendant or earring design. This is exactly the same thing. I just used 8mm fire polish down the center. I used 4mm bicones on the sides, and then I added a little bit of embellishment right on the tip to finish it off nicely. One last thing I'd like to talk about is your color choices. And that is, I tend to do a pretty monochromatic palette. That just happens to be something that I really like. But you can see here where I used brown and green. this would be really gorgeous if then I finished all the green ruffles and my 3mm fire polish was bronze again, brought that bronze back in again. In this particular bracelet, one of my original ideas was to use this matte, darker fire polish bead as the accent bead, but then I decided that I really wanted that sparkle of the Swarovski crystals. So the crystals ended up being nice and similar to the seed bead color so that the sparkle is subtle. If I'd used these darker matte beads, it would have been a much more dramatic kind of look. We need to talk about length, and the reason I'm showing these two bracelets is because if you refer to your handout that comes with your class, I do give some counts on your beads, but I wanted to show you that not all beads are created equal. These two bracelets were made with the same number of beads across the center here. There's 30 beads across this center. And these beads, when I purchased them, were labeled as 6mm, as were these. But these are actually closer to a 7mm bead. And you'll notice what a huge difference that makes in our sizing. It actually added an entire inch to this bracelet. So while I give you some estimates, and generally it's about 5 beads per inch, be sure to measure with your tape measure because you can get surprised at the end. One other thing I want to mention about that whole measurement thing is when I talk about 5 beads per inch and as you're measuring your length, I'm not including this little guy out here that's part of your clasp. I consider that last little bit part of your clasp. So when you're measuring, I want you to just measure the inside part. In this particular case, this inside part measures about 7.5 inches, which means that our clasp adds about an inch, and this is an 8.5 inch bracelet. I've cut my thread here, and I cut a good generous length. You can use whatever length you're comfortable with at this point. If you're really unsure where to start with a wingspan, which is an outstretched arm to an outstretched arm. You will have to add thread as you go on in this project, so you can use whatever you're comfortable with. I've already threaded my needle, and for this first section, we're just going to be working with your 6mm fire polish beads. We don't even need to put a stopper bead on this at all because after our very first stitch, everything's going to be secure. You're picking up 2 of the 6mm fire polish, and you're going to bring them down to the end of your thread till you have roughly 4 to 6 inches left below it. We just need enough so that we can end that off later by tying a couple of knots. What we're going to be doing here is ladder stitch. So coming from the tail end back up, we're going to just go through one of these beads. It's going to force the other 6mm fire polish to come and sit right next to it. They're going to look a little wonky. It's going to be a little awkward. It's totally okay because we're going to make them all nice and neat later. At this point, we're going to be working off the new bead that you added each time. But if you notice, our working thread is over to the other side of where we want to be adding new beads. So every time you've made a stitch, you're going to have to also needle through the bead you just added to get your thread in position to add another bead. Now our thread is on this outside edge bead and we're ready to add another bead. We'll pick that up. And the rules of ladder stitch are this. Whichever direction your thread is coming out of that bead, you want to go in the opposite side. The reason I teach you a rule instead of it's always the top or always the bottom is because it's going to change from stitch to stitch. So now here we've got that bead attached, but again, our working thread is in the middle of the piece. We want to be on the outside edge. So we're going to needle through the bead that we just added to get to that outside edge. You're going to keep adding beads this way. My thread's coming out the top, so I'm going in the bottom. You're going to keep adding beads this way until you get the length that you want. Here's the thing, because these are all looking kind of oddball and wonky, let me show you here in a sec. See how they're not real nice and straight? You're gonna have a lot of thread showing. That's totally okay, because when we get our length, we're going to go back in and tighten all this up. You may find at the end of that point that you may have to add additional beads to get your length correct, and we'll look at that later. I'm going to make just a little mini bracelet here. So we're going to pretend that this is all the beads that I need to add, and I'm ready to start tightening all this up and making it look pretty. All you're going to do is, without adding any beads at all, you're going to circle around sets of 2 beads, and then just kind of give a little tug on the end of your thread as you do that each set. It will help tighten everything up, and you're going to find that this solves a world of problems, all this little tightening that we're about to do. So just going around in circles. I know that this makes a lot of thread showing, but don't worry about that, because we're going to hide all that thread later with seed beads. Just keep going around. You can kind of help them sit a little bit better, but over time, as we add more and more layers of embellishment to this, it's going to look even better and straighter. Here you can see what it looks like after you've got all of your fire polish nice and tightened up. You've woven through all of them and eliminated a lot of all that extra thread and space. You may find that it's tightened up so much that you need to add more fire polish beads, and that's fine. You can do that from this end where you're at right now. We need to create an opening at one end to accommodate the clasp that we're going to add later. So what we need to add is 8 seed beads, a fire polish bead, one of your 6mm, and 8 more seed beads. We're going to pretend like this is just another ladder stitch step. You're attaching it through the beads that are already there, the bead that's already there, and then we're going to go ahead and circle back around through all of these again. So you're needling through all the seed beads. You're needling through that fire polish, that single fire polish there. And then you're needling through all of the seed beads again. We'll needle through that end fire polish one additional time. So that's created a nice little opening for us. Now we're ready to add some seed bead ruffles along the edge. We ended up with all of this thread showing, and we don't want thread showing. It's ugly. So we're going to cover it up with seed beads. Pick up 3 of your seed beads. We're just going to simply weave back and forth, kind of like you did when you made everything nice and tight. But we're just going to weave back and forth through the beads. So you can see how those beads sit right along the edge of the thread that was showing before. You'll pick up 3 more seed beads, and then you're just going to needle through the next 6mm fire polish. So it creates almost like an S-shaped wave, at least for right now. We're going to go fill in those gaps later. Continue adding these waves of 3 seed beads until you get to the opposite side of your bracelet. At some point very soon, you're going to run into running out of thread. So let me show you how you're going to add and end your threads. In this case, you can end your thread anywhere along these thread intersections. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to tie a knot using that thread. This is a perfect place for me to show that to you. What you're going to do is take your needle and you're just going to catch the thread that's already there, pull the working thread down so you have a little loop left. You don't want to leave this loop too big, because the bigger it is, the more likely it is to do some premature knotting on you, and then you kind of have a mess on your hands. So make a nice small little loop here, and then you're going to take your needle through that loop. It does not matter whether you go front to back or back to front. And then you slowly tighten that knot down. And the reason I go slowly is if I start to get into trouble where it's knotting way up here on the thread, I can catch that and move the knot before I'm in too much trouble. I like to tie at least 2 to 3 knots to secure my thread. So in this case, what I would do is move that thread over to another bead, and we'll do the same thing, catching it along this thread intersection here. So we're going to needle underneath the thread that's already there, create your small loop, pop that needle through the loop, and then tighten that all down nice and slowly so that it hides. We're going to be adding seed beads in these open areas later, so again we're going to be able to cover up any of those knots that might be visible right now. My last rule is that I never cut the thread right next to where I've knotted. So I want to go ahead and move my needle and thread over at least one more bead, and now I can cut that off with no problem. I've gone ahead and cut a new length of thread and threaded my needle. So to add the new thread, I'm going to do the same thing, just in reverse, where I'm going to needle through a bead. We'll pull down to where I've got just a little bit of a tail showing. It's simply something for me to hold on to make sure that I don't pull the whole thing through the bead while I'm tying my knot. We're going to use this little thread intersection right here to tie our first knot. You're needling underneath that thread, pulling down so that you've got a little loop, needling through the loop, and then tightening slowly right next to the bead. You'll move over a bead, the fire polish beads. Got a little bit of a tangle going on there, so let's get that out of the way. When you see yourself getting a tangle, you want to stop and address it before it gets any worse. So right here, I can kind of see daylight in between here. This is going to be pretty easy to get out. If I had kept going and tightened this down, then you're going to be in trouble. It's going to take you a lot longer to get your knot out. There we go. So now I'm on this edge. I want to go ahead and make my next attachment knot by going underneath that thread, pulling down until I've got that little loop, going through the loop, and then tightening that down slowly. This was the last pass of seed beads that we added, so I know that I need to be right here to continue on adding more seed beads. Now that I've added this thread, I can go ahead and cut that little tail off. Once you've finished adding that first layer, those first waves of the 3 seed beads to your bracelet and you get down to the end here, super easy to just turn around, and now we're going to start going back the opposite direction, and we're filling in the spots that are open, that were open, left open. So picking up 3 seed beads, and you're just doing your zigzag wave back the opposite direction. You'll keep going until you've finished filling in all those spots. Once you've filled in all of those spots with your little waves of 3, we're actually going to duplicate all of that again and do a whole second set of waves with 3 seed beads. But we also want to duplicate this little bridge to this fire polish here for our clasp area. So we put 8 beads there before. We're going to pick up 8 beads again and double the number of beads to the bridge. You'll needle through that 6mm fire polish who's kind of hanging out on the end over there. So it just gives you 2 lines of the seed beads. And then you'll do the same thing coming back on the opposite edge. Pick up 8 more seed beads and come on up back into the base of the bracelet. And at that point, you're just going to repeat this whole zigzag pattern, adding your sets of 3. So picking up 3 more seed beads, needling down the next fire polish. As you do this, you just want to make sure that they're sitting that the 2 waves sit next to each other. You don't want one hitching up on top of the other one, because you'll end up with some extra thread showing if you do that. So go ahead and make your way down the bracelet and back up again, adding your waves of 3. I've gone ahead and filled in all of my second set of waves so you can see them lined up nicely on the edges. And you could actually at this point end off the bracelet and have a perfectly beautiful bracelet to wear. But we're not done yet. We're going to go ahead and add some more ruffles. So at this point we're going to be adding sets of 5 seed beads, and we're going to go from the center seed bead to the center seed bead of each wave as we do so, which means that to get in position we need to needle through the first 2 seed beads in the set of 3. That has us coming out of that center seed bead. Then we'll pick up 5 and we'll find that middle seed bead of the next wave. And right now it's not going to look too terribly roughly, but trust me, it'll get there. So go ahead and add sets of 5 seed beads all the way down the edge. I'm ready to add my last set of 5 beads here, and as I do so, in addition to going through that center bead of the set of 3 there, I also need to finish going through the rest of that little set of 3, so it's actually going through 2 beads in this particular case. I'm going to then needle through that outside fire polish bead, and then through 2 seed beads here on the edge. Looks like I goofed right there, and I've only got 2 seed beads instead of 3. But that's okay, because by the time we add all the extra beads, you're never even going to notice it. And now I'm set up to where I can add my set of 5 beads all the way along on this edge. Once I've completed all of my sets of 5 along here, we also want to add some ruffles on this extra little end cap that we've got, because once we've added ruffles here, that's really going to make our clasp look even more seamless later on. Now the problem is we've got 8 beads here, which doesn't really lend us to the whole 3 beads, doing something every 3 beads. So we're just going to fudge it. I usually will go through about the 4th bead and then the last bead when I add my ruffles of 5 here. And if I catch that last bead and then go through the outside fire polish, we'll do the same thing here. I'll actually needle up through 1 bead, pick up 5 more seed beads, go through the 4th bead. Again, remember, this is not brain surgery. You could go through the 3rd bead, you could go through the 5th bead. It really is just kind of a make it work kind of moment. So we've got 1 more set of 5 in here that we need to add in here to fill in. And we're going to go back now and catch the 3rd seed bead where our last ruffle was coming out of. At this point, we've added all of the ruffles on our first set of 3s, but we're going to need to go ahead and add ruffles to the other set of 3s too. So we're going to work our thread down into the fire polish beads. We're going to get back over to the other side. This is just so that we can get closer to where the side where our 3s are still visible. We're going to go up the first 2 seed beads of a wave of 3, and now we're ready to add our waves of 5 beads all the way around, and we'll complete it right where we've begun. So we're creating 2 rows of those waves of 5 seed beads. So these are the 2 that I've added on our sets of 3 on this side, and then we've got all of the waves on the opposite edge. Here I have finished my 2nd row of 5 seed bead waves. We've got them on both sides of the bracelet and all the way around. And this would be another really lovely place to stop and finish your thread and have a lovely bracelet to wear around. We're going to go ahead and add our rows of 7 embellishment now. And we're going to do something a little bit different this time. Instead of just picking up 7 seed beads, I like to add an extra embellishment on this row. So instead of 7 seed beads, I am adding 3 seed beads, a 3mm fire polish, and 3 seed beads. It's just going to give everything a little extra glimmer and sparkle. And as we did before, I've positioned myself so I'm coming out of the middle seed bead of the wave of 5. So I went up 3 seed beads, coming out that 3rd seed bead in the middle. And then I'm going to needle through the 3rd seed bead on the next wave over. And this is where you're really starting to see all that wave action happen. So it's 3 seed beads, a 3mm fire polish, and 3 more seed beads. And you're needling through the middle seed bead of the next wave over. You will go completely around this bracelet. on both sides and both set of waves with your sets of 7. I've finished adding all of my loops of 7 on both sets of loops, so you can see that there's 2 very distinct sets there. And these are just going to wave and fluff in the breeze. Make sure that as you're going around and adding all of these, that you're catching the seed beads on the clasp area also, because once we add our peyote tube toggle and it inserts in there, that's going to make for a very seamless transition. You're not even going to notice that your bracelet ends anywhere. I got down to the end and I've just got a small amount of thread left, and I wanted to show you how you can end your thread off when you've got this much stuff going on. You don't necessarily at this point need to weave back down to those center fire polish beads. You can actually tie your knots in the waves just by catching one of the threads that's there. So let me see if I can isolate this a little bit for you. I try to pull everything that I can away so that I don't get my thread caught on all the other ruffles. And I'm just going to loop right under the thread, right where my current working thread is coming out. Take this really slow, because it is going to be easy to actually get everything caught up in those ruffles, and then you're going to have a big tangle and you'll be very sad. So I've got my little loop, I'm going through the loop, and I'm tightening right down in that intersection. And then I can just move several beads away in any one of these ruffles. I can work my way down towards the center a little bit. And I can catch my thread right there where the loop of, or the set of 5 is attaching into the set of 3. Catching the thread, there's my little loop right there. Go through the loop and pull down, making sure that that loop does not get caught on any of the other seed beads, and it's popped right into the thread intersection. And then lastly, I will move a couple more beads away, and now I can trim that thread and I would be done. We need to make the peyote tube toggle. That is going to be the second half of your clasp. And we're going to use a brand new piece of thread to do that. So cut yourself about a yard's worth, or that works out to roughly an outstretched arm's length. I've gone ahead and attached my stopper bead, and then I strung on 10 seed beads. Here's my 11th seed bead, which is going to be the first bead of my next row. I like to do my peyote where I'm holding it with the tail away from me. I have that 11th bead. It's going to sit right next to bead number 10, and so I'm going to needle back towards the tail through bead number 9. And as I pull, you want these beads to kind of sit next to each other and create a little T-form shape. So then we'll pick up another bead. You're going to skip a bead for it to sit next to, and then needle through the next bead. So I'm skipping this one and needling through the next bead. And you'll notice how those stack nicely next to each other. We'll keep adding a bead, skipping a bead, and going through the next bead until we get to the end of this group of 10 beads. You can see how they're like a little zipper. You've got the sticky outy beads and then these openings in between. What we're going to do is we're going to fill in those openings. So I flip my piece over because I always like to work away from me. And here's my very first opening. I'm going to pick up a bead to fill that in, and I'm needling through the sticky outy bead. Pick up a bead, needle through the next sticky outy. You will keep adding beads and adding rows until you end up with 10 rows total. Here I've finished my 10 rows, and you're probably asking yourself, how do you know it's 10 rows? Traditionally, people will tell you that you count your rows on a diagonal, so you could count those 10 beads, or those beads, and it would come up to be 10. That can be a little bit difficult on your eyes to follow those beads along though. So here's an easier way. Count the outside 2 columns. So there's 5 beads in this column and 5 beads in this column, and that means we have 10 rows. I've also gone ahead and removed the stopper bead, so I still have the tail thread there, but no stopper bead. We're going to take this little flat piece of peyote, and I'm going to fold it kind of like a taco. You want those outside edges to sit right next to each other. And what you'll see is that the sticky outy beads alternate as you go back and forth across this patch. What we're going to do is we're going to zip those sticky uppy beads together. So I'm going to needle through the very first sticky uppy. The next one is going to be on the opposite side. So I'll catch that one. And so you'll just be going from side to side picking up those beads that stick out. And as you pull, you're going to notice that they pull inward, and it makes for a nice seamless tube. Okay, so there's my tube. You have your tail thread coming out of one bead, and the very next door neighbor is where your working thread is going to be coming out of. You'll notice that there's no thread attaching these 2 beads together. So as we end off these threads into our toggle here, we want to make sure that we create a thread intersection and connect those 2 beads. So with my working thread here, I'm actually going to just come right on over to that neighbor and needle through him. And then this is the way I like to end off the thread in my peyote toggles. I like to go down 3 beads on a diagonal. You can either do them one at a time, or if you're lucky, you can catch all 3 of them. Sometimes it's just easier to do them one at a time. So I went down 3. Now I'm just going to shift over by 1 bead, and I'm going to go up 3 beads. I like to change directions at least 3 times when I am ending off my thread. So I'm going to go down 3 beads, which will be my third change of direction. At that point, I've got it nice and secure. I can clip off that thread. I can do the exact same thing with my tail thread, bury my tail thread that same way, and then this toggle is ready to be attached to your bracelet. I've added a new thread here, so I'm ready to go ahead and add my peyote tube toggle to the end of the bracelet. And to do that, we are going to start out by coming out of the fire polish bead on the end with your thread. You'll pick up 8 seed beads. Then we're going to go ahead and needle through 2 seed beads in the center of this tube. I just kind of eyeball where those 2 seed beads are, and some of these seed beads it'll be easier for your needle to go through than others. So if you encounter a whole bunch of resistance at first, just keep moving around until you find 2 seed beads that your needle goes through easily in the center there. We'll bring that on down. I'm picking up 2 more seed beads. And then I'm going to go back here and needle through this 3rd seed bead from the tube. So you see I separated these 2 closer to the tube. I'm going to needle back towards the bracelet through the 3rd one. Then I need to pick up 5 more seed beads for this leg of our attachment. And I'll needle up through that last 6mm fire polish bead. So that has it completely attached. I do like you to reinforce this whole thread path at least 2 more times, because your clasp is your point of most wear and tear on a bracelet. So if anything's going to break, that's a good bet. By adding more passes of thread through here, that gives you a stronger connection. So that means not picking up any additional beads, but simply taking your needle and thread and tracing back through the beads that are already there. This is something to watch out for. My thread got, as I was tightening that down, got caught again around the toggle there. Make sure that if that happens, you find it and release that thread. You don't want that showing. Then I would go ahead and retrace that path one more time. Once you've done that, you can end your thread off in the body of the bracelet like we've been doing, and you will find that this toggle will fit through the hole that we created before and make a nice seamless fit for your bracelet. I hope you had a really good time working on your project, and if you did run into any problems or have any questions, please feel free to give us an email at classes@beaducation.com so that we can help you out. I hope you had a really good time, and I hope to see you in a class again soon. Thanks so much.